If you've ever locked your door at night and told yourself that was enough, that walls and windows and the dark outside were a boundary something couldn't cross, this is for you. Not to scare you, to show you what happens when a whole city learns, too late, that the lock was never the thing that kept them safe. I was 17 when the first one happened. Austin, Texas, December 1884. I had come from the country, a farm east of the city, when I was 16. My mother had died. My father had remarried. There was no room for me. A woman from our church had a cousin in Austin who needed help. I took the train. I had never been to a city. I had never slept in a house where I didn't know every sound. The Hackett house on East Avenue was big. White clapboard, a porch, a yard that ran down to an alley. They had a cook when I arrived, an older woman, but she left after a month. Mrs. Hackett asked if I could manage. I said yes. I learned. I had been in service for 8 months when the first attack happened. Cooking, scrubbing, tending the children when Mrs. Hackett had her headaches. I slept in a small room at the back of the property. It had been built for help, a narrow room with a bed, a washstand, a chair. In summer it was too hot. In winter the wind came through the window. The window didn't quite close. The latch was loose. I had mentioned it once. Mrs. Hackett had said she would have someone look at it. No one ever did. The door led onto the yard. It had a lock. I used it. I didn't think of the room as dangerous. I thought of it as mine. It was the first place that had been mine since I had left my father's house. I didn't know yet that mine could mean alone. I didn't know yet that the back of the house was the place the world could get in. The city was growing. Railroads, new buildings, men in suits and women in bustles, and everywhere girls like me, Irish, German, colored, living in the margins of other people's homes. We were the ones who got up first and went to bed last. We were the ones who knew where every key was hung and which window stuck and which floorboard creaked. We were also the ones who slept alone at the back of the house. Nobody said it out loud. Not then. You didn't complain about the room at the back. You didn't ask to sleep in the main house. You took the position. You took the wage. You took the room they gave you. If you were lucky, the family was kind. If you were lucky, the lock worked. If you were lucky, nothing ever happened. Most of the time, nothing did. Austin was a growing city. There were jobs. There were families who needed help. There were girls like me who had left somewhere else, another town, another country, to make a life. We didn't have the option to pack up and leave every time we were afraid. Leaving meant no reference. No reference meant no next position. No next position meant no wage. No wage meant no room, no food, no way to live. So we stayed. We stayed in the rooms at the back. We stayed in the houses where the attacks had happened 2 streets over, 1 street over. We stayed and we locked the door and we put the washstand in front of it and we told ourselves that we would be careful, that we would listen, that we would be ready. We had the option to hope. And when the first attack happened, we had the option to tell ourselves it was a one-off, a tramp, a robbery, something that would never happen again. We took that option. We had to. There was nothing else to take. What we did for each other. We had no police we could trust to take us seriously. We had no patrol that walked the alleys. What we had was each other. We had a system. If you were leaving the market after dark, you waited for another girl. You didn't walk alone. If you had a room at the back and the family was away, you asked the girl next door, the one at the Bensons, the one at the Reeds, to listen. Not to come over, just to listen. If she heard you scream, she would scream. She would wake the block. It wasn't much, it was something. We left marks for each other too. A chalk mark on a fence meant someone was in the yard here. A rag tied to a gate meant prowler on this street. We didn't write it down. We didn't tell the families. The families would have said we were stirring panic. They would have said we were hysterical. So we passed it in the market. We passed it at the pump. We passed it when we met in the alley between the houses, two girls in aprons, one of us saying, "Did you hear about the Reeds?" And the other one nodding and saying, "I'm not sleeping with the window open anymore." We couldn't protect each other from him. We couldn't stop him from getting in. We could only make sure we weren't alone in the dark with the knowledge. We could only make sure someone else knew to listen. It wasn't enough. It was all we had. The first attack wasn't in our neighborhood. It was on Water Street in a little frame house where a woman named Molly Smith worked as a cook. She was colored. She had a husband, a man named Tom, and they lived in a cabin behind the main house. The family they worked for, the Hobsons, slept in the big house. Molly and Tom slept in the cabin. On the night of December 30th, 1884, someone came in. They didn't break the door. They didn't smash a window. They got in. Quiet, Tom was hit first, struck in the head with an axe or something like an axe so hard he didn't wake up. Molly was dragged out of bed, beaten, assaulted, then killed with the same weapon. The coroner said she had been struck multiple times. The killer had moved fast. No hesitation. When the Hobsons found them in the morning, the cabin was a slaughterhouse. Blood on the walls, blood on the bed, and no sign of how he had gotten in or out or who he was. The woman who found them was the Hobsons' maid, a girl named Cora. She had gone to the cabin at first light to ask Molly for the key to the flour bin. She said she knocked. No answer. She said she pushed the door. It wasn't latched. She said she saw Tom first. He was in the bed. She thought he was sleeping. Then she saw the blood. She said she didn't go in. She said she backed out. She said she ran to the big house screaming. Mr. Hobson went to the cabin. He came out white. He sent for the police. By noon, the street was full of people. By afternoon, the story was all over town. We heard it in pieces, both of them in the bed, an axe. She was dragged. I didn't know Cora. I didn't know Molly, but I could see it. The cabin, the door. The maid walking up in the morning with the sun just up, thinking about flour. I could see it, and I could see myself. My room, my door, my morning. I didn't want to, I couldn't stop. The inquest was held 2 days later. I didn't attend. Servants didn't attend inquests, but the details got back to us. The coroner said Tom had been struck once in the head with a heavy blade. He had likely never woken. Molly had been struck multiple times. She had fought. There were marks on her hands, her arms. She had tried to get away. The weapon was never found. The door had no forced lock. The window had no broken glass. The killer had come in as if he had a key, or as if the door had been left open, or as if he had some other way and that left no trace. He had done what he came to do. He had left. And the only thing the law had was 2 bodies and a cabin full of blood and 100 questions that would never be answered. I heard about it from the other girls. We passed the story at the pump, at the market, in the narrow alleys between the big houses. Did you hear? Water Street, a cook and her husband, an axe. Nobody said our names. Nobody had to. We were all cooks. We were all someone's Molly in one way or another. We had our own telegraph. The families we worked for read the papers. We read the papers too when we could get them, but we also had the girls who had been there. The girl who knew the Hobsons' laundress. The girl who had a cousin who had seen the cabin the day after. We put the story together in pieces. We passed it on. We added what we did to feel safe. Put something in front of the door. Tie a string. Sleep with a knife. We didn't know if any of it would work. We did it anyway. It was all we had. Mrs. Hackett told me not to dwell on it. A robbery gone wrong, she said. Probably a tramp. They'll catch him. I nodded and went back to scrubbing. But that night, in my room at the back of the house, I pushed the washstand in front of the door. Just for a night or two, I told myself. Until they caught him. They didn't catch him. If you're listening because you like true crime, Because you like the puzzle, the twist, the moment when the detective puts it together. I have to tell you something. This story doesn't have that moment. Nobody put it together. Nobody was caught. What we got instead was a slow, spreading dread and a name that the newspapers made up when they ran out of other words. They called him the Servant Girl Annihilator, and for 8 months he was ours. The name was in the Austin Daily Statesman. It was in the Galveston News. It was the kind of name that sold papers. It was also the kind of name that stuck to us. When we walked to the market, when we went to church, when we applied for a new position, we were the ones the Annihilator had come for. We were the servant girls. We were the ones in the back room. The name didn't protect us. It named us. It made us the target. And it made the rest of the city, the ones in the big houses, the ones who slept with their families around them, feel a little more distance. It's the servant girls. As if that meant it wasn't the city. As if that meant it wasn't all of us. We knew better. We knew that every time we lay down in the dark, we were lying down in the same city as him. We were the ones he had chosen. We were the ones who had to find a way to live with it. The second attack was in January. Another colored woman, Eliza Shelley. She worked for a family on East Avenue not far from us. She slept in a room in the main house near the kitchen. There were people in the house, a family, other servants. It didn't matter. He got in. He found her. He struck her in the head with an axe, then fled. She lived long enough to say a few words. She said a man had come in through the window. She said he was quick. She said she hadn't heard him until he was already on her. She died before she could say more. What the law had. I'll tell you what I heard from a man who had been a constable then. He was old when he told it. He said he had been at the Shelley house an hour after they found Eliza. He said the room was small. A servant's room, a bed, a chair, a window that looked out on the alley. The window was open, not broken. Open as if someone had slipped the latch from outside or as if it had been left unlatched. There was blood on the pillow, blood on the floor. Eliza had been carried to the settee in the parlor. She was still alive when he got there. She was trying to speak. He said he leaned in. He said he heard her say, through the window. He came through the window so fast. Then she died, just like that. He said they searched the alley. They found nothing. No footprints in the mud. It hadn't rained. No dropped tool. No witness. The family had heard nothing. The other servants had heard nothing. The killer had come in, done his work, and left. The constable said they brought in every man who had done work at that house in the past year. They brought in tramps they had picked up on the road. They had nothing to match. No one had seen a man climbing in a window. No one had seen a man running. He said that was when he knew they might never catch him, not because the killer was a ghost, because he was careful, because he chose his moment, because he left nothing behind. The papers ran the story. The police offered a reward. Men with shotguns walked the streets at night. For a few weeks, Austin felt like a town under siege, and then nothing. No arrest. No suspect. Life went on. People stopped talking about it at the pump. Mrs. Hackett stopped asking me if I was still nervous. I left the washstand in front of the door anyway. Habit. Or maybe I knew in some part of me I didn't want to listen to that it wasn't over. In May he came back, Irene Cross, white. A servant in the household of a man named Thomas. She slept in a room with another girl, Mary Ramey. In the middle of the night, someone opened the door. He had a lamp. He held it up. He looked at them. Then he put the lamp down and went for Irene. He beat her. He dragged her. He attacked her with an axe. Mary screamed. She fought. She was hurt too badly, but she lived. She gave the police a description. A man, not tall, agile. He moved like he knew the house. He was gone before anyone else could get there. Irene died. Mary Ramey's description was in every paper, stealthy, quick, knew the layout. People started to say it had to be someone who had been in these houses before, a delivery boy, a handyman, Someone who had cased the places in daylight and come back at night. Nobody could prove it. Nobody could find him. What Mary Ramey saw. I'm not Mary, I never met her. But I heard her story from a girl who had a cousin who sat in the inquest. And later, when the papers printed her testimony, sanitized, cut the way they did, I read every word. So what I'm giving you now is the story the way we told it in the alleys and the kitchens when we were trying to make sense of how fast it had happened, how close we all were. Mary and Irene shared a room in the Thomas house. It was May. The windows were open a crack for the heat. They had blown out the lamp at 10. Irene had said something about the man who had come to fix the fence that afternoon, how he had looked at them when they brought out the lemonade. Mary had told her to hush and go to sleep. Mary woke because the door was opening, not a creak, not the wind, the door, moving. She said later she thought it was Mrs. Thomas coming to check on them. She was about to speak when she saw the light, a lamp. Someone was holding a lamp. The flame was low, turned down so it threw more shadow than light. The figure in the doorway was just a shape, a man's shape. He didn't rush. He didn't make a sound. He stepped into the room and held the lamp up. He looked at Irene. He looked at Mary. He looked at Irene again. Then he set the lamp on the dresser. He turned the wick up. The room got brighter. Mary said she could see his hands. She could see he was holding something long, something that caught the light. She screamed. Irene woke. She didn't have time to sit up. He was on her. He grabbed her by the hair. He dragged her off the bed. Mary was screaming and screaming. She threw herself at him. He backhanded her once and she was on the floor. She said she felt her lips split. She said she tasted blood. She said she was still screaming when she heard the first blow. The sound, not a slap, not a punch, something heavy, something that made a sound she had never heard before and never forgot. She got up. She ran at him again. He hit her with the axe, the flat of it or the handle, and she went down. She didn't pass out. She lay there. She couldn't move. She could see Irene. She could see what he was doing. She could see the lamp still burning on the dresser. She said she prayed for someone to come, for Mr. Thomas, for anyone. No one came. The house was asleep. The street was asleep. She was awake. Irene was awake, and he was not in a hurry. When he was done, he left the way he had come. Through the door, no running, no panic. Mary said she heard his footsteps in the hall. She said she heard the back door open and close. Then silence. She lay there until the sky turned gray. Then she crawled to the window and screamed until someone came. Irene was already dead. Mary lived. She gave the police a description. A man, not tall, strong, quick. He had known where the room was. He had known there were two girls. He had chosen Irene. He had brought the lamp so he could see, so he could choose. That's the part that stays with me. He brought a lamp. He wanted to see. He wanted to know who he was killing. He wasn't a thief who got surprised. He wasn't a madman who struck in the dark. He came in. He lit the room. He looked at them. And then he did what he came to do. If you're listening and you think that violence is always chaos, that killers don't plan, don't choose, don't take their time, remember Mary Ramey. Remember the lamp. Remember that he set it down before he raised the axe. He had time. He had control. He wanted to see. If you're listening and you think that violence is always chaos, that killers don't plan, don't choose, don't take their time, remember Mary Ramey. Remember the lamp. Remember that he set it down before he raised the axe. He had time. He had control. He wanted to see. That's not madness. That's method. And method means he could do it again. He could be doing it still, somewhere, under another name. In another city. In a room where someone is lying in the dark right now, listening to the door. That's the hook. That's why we're still telling this story. Because the man who held the lamp in Mary Ramey's room was never caught. Because the man who left Susan Hancock for dead was never caught. Because the only thing that stopped the attacks in Austin was that he left. Not that he was caught. Not that he was stopped, he left. And we were left with the question, where did he go? And what did he do next? By then, the phrase Servant Girl Annihilator was in the headlines. Not just in Austin, in Galveston, in San Antonio, in papers that got sent east. The city was ashamed. The city was afraid. And the girls who slept in the back rooms and the cabins and the attics, we stopped sleeping. We lay in the dark and listened. We learned the sound of every branch on the window, every rat in the wall. We stopped being able to tell the difference between the wind and a footstep. I want you to understand that's the real horror. Not one night, not one attack. It's the nights after, the waiting. The way your own house becomes a place you're not safe. The way you look at every man on the street and think, could it be him? The way you look at the lock on your door and know, in your bones, that it wasn't enough for Molly or Eliza or Irene. So why would it be enough for you? In August, he hit the Eula Phillips house. Eula was white, 15 years old. She was married to a man named Jimmy Phillips. They lived in a small house on Water Street, same street where Molly Smith had died. Eula's mother, Mrs. Phillips, lived with them. So did a servant, a young colored woman named Susan Hancock. On the night of the attack, someone got in. Again, no broken lock. No shattered window. He was just in. He went to Eula first. He killed her with an axe. He killed her mother. He attacked Susan Hancock so badly she was left for dead, but she didn't die. She survived. She told the police what she could. A man, fast, strong. He had moved through the house like he had been there before. Like he knew exactly where to go. The city went mad. Vigilante patrols, accusations. Jimmy Phillips was arrested. People said he had killed his wife. He was tried. The case fell apart. He was released. Susan Hancock's testimony didn't match the story the mob wanted. She had seen the killer. She had described him. The description didn't fit Jimmy. The mob didn't care. The city wanted someone to blame. It wanted a name. It wanted to believe that if they locked up the right man, the attacks would stop. So they locked up the husband. They tried him. And when the case fell apart, when the evidence didn't fit, when Susan said it wasn't him, they let him go. The real killer was never found, but the fear had already turned into something else. Suspicion, rumor. Men pointed at other men. Colored men were stopped in the street. White men who had done work at the wrong house were questioned. The city was looking for a monster. It was willing to make one out of anyone. That's what fear does when it runs out of answers. It invents a villain. It needs someone to punish. And the real monster, the one who had gotten in, who had left nothing behind, who had moved on to the next house or the next city, was already gone. Susan Hancock lived. She was colored. She was young. She had been in the house that night, in a room near Eula and Mrs. Phillips. What I'm going to give you now is the story we put together from what she said, from what the papers printed, from what got passed along when we needed to know, so we could try to understand, so we could try to be ready if it happened to us. She said she woke to the sound of blows, not a scream first. The blows, something heavy, something that didn't stop. She said she sat up. She said she didn't know what it was. She thought maybe someone had fallen. She thought maybe something had broken. She got out of bed. She opened her door. The hallway was dark. She said she could see a sliver of light under Eula's door. She said she could hear the sound now wet wrong. She said she pushed the door open. She said she saw him, a man, his back to her. He was over Eula. He was raising something, bringing it down. She said she screamed. She said she didn't think, she just screamed. He turned. She said she saw his face. She said she would never forget it, not tall, strong. He dropped what he was doing. He came for her. She ran. She said she ran for the back door. She said she didn't think about Mrs. Phillips. She didn't think about anything. She ran. He was faster. He caught her in the hallway. He struck her. She said she felt the blow. She said she went down. She said she thought, I'm dead. I'm dead. She said she played dead. She didn't move, she didn't breathe, she lay there. She said she could hear him. He was moving, he was going back. She said she could hear the sounds again. She said she lay there for a long time. She said she didn't know how long. She said she could hear her own heart. She said when she finally opened her eyes, the house was quiet. The door to the street was open. He was gone. She crawled. She said she crawled to the door. She said she crawled into the street. She said she screamed until the neighbors came. The papers printed her description. A man, not tall, agile. He knew the house. It was the same description Mary Ramey had given. The same description that would never be enough to catch anyone. Susan survived, but she never worked in a private house again. I heard she left Austin. I heard she never slept in a room alone. I don't know if that's true. I only know that the ones who saw him, really saw him, carried it. They were the evidence. They were also the ones who had to live with what they had seen. Susan had seen him turn. She had seen him choose to leave Eula and come for her. She had seen that he could have killed her. He had chosen to leave her for dead instead. She had to live with that, with the choice. With the fact that she had survived because he had assumed she wouldn't. That's not mercy. That's luck. And luck is not something you can count on. I didn't know Eula. I didn't know Susan, but I knew the house. I had walked past it. I had seen the window that faced the street. I had thought more than once that's the kind of window that doesn't close all the way. I remember going to the market the week after the Phillips house. It was a Tuesday. I had a list: flour, sugar, a length of thread, normal things. The streets were full. The sun was out, but nobody looked at each other the same. The women at the stalls looked at every man who passed. The men with wagons looked at the alleys. I saw two girls I knew, servants from a house on the next block. We didn't speak at first. We just looked at each other. Then one of them said, "Did you hear about Susan?" I said I had. She said she's leaving. She won't stay in town. The other girl said I would leave too if I could. We stood there. We didn't say what we were all thinking, that we couldn't leave, that we had to stay, that we had to go back to our rooms at the back of the house and lie down in the dark and hope. I bought my flour. I went home. I put the washstand in front of the door. I put a chair under the window. I tied a string from the door handle to a pot so it would clatter if the door opened. It was all I could do. It was what we all did. Mrs. Hackett said I was being foolish, that I was scaring the children. I didn't care. I had seen the list of names: Molly, Eliza, Irene, Eula, Mrs. Phillips. And the ones who had lived, Mary Ramey, Susan Hancock, were broken. They had seen his face. They had felt his hands, and he was still out there. What the city looked like. Austin in 1884 was not the city you know. The Capitol was still being built. The dome wouldn't be finished for years. Congress Avenue was dirt and boardwalks. The Colorado River ran through the middle of everything. You could smell it when the wind was right, mud and water and the things that grew along the banks. When it rained, the streets turned to mud. The wagons left ruts. The horses left prints. And when it was dry, the dust blew. We had gas lamps in the better neighborhoods, East Avenue, the blocks around the governor's mansion. We had kerosene in the rest. We had servants' quarters that backed onto alleys. We had windows that didn't close and doors that didn't lock. We had clotheslines and wood piles and sheds that made shadows. We had 100 ways for a man who knew the town to move through it without being seen. He could have walked the alleys. He could have crossed the yards. He could have known which houses had dogs and which didn't. He could have watched. He could have waited. He could have chosen. We didn't know. We only knew that he was getting in, that he was fast, that he was gone before the sun came up, and that the city we lived in, the city we had thought was ours, had become a place where the dark had a name and the name was his. After dark, the patrols started. Citizens' committees. Men with rifles and shotguns walking the blocks around the big houses. They didn't walk the alleys. They didn't stand watch at the back of the properties where the cooks and the maids slept. They walked the main streets. They protected the front doors. The back doors were our problem. We were the ones who had to lie in the dark and listen. The newspapers printed every rumor. Servant Girl Annihilator strikes again. No arrest in Water Street horror. Police baffled. The reward grew. $50, 100, 200 strangers came forward with tips. A tramp seen near the Hobson place. A Negro man seen running, a white man with a limp. A man who had asked for work at the Thomas house the week before. Every lead went nowhere. The police arrested men. They questioned them. They let them go. The real killer left no footprints, no dropped weapon, no witness who could give a name. Only survivors who could say he was fast, he was strong, he knew the house. By August, when the Phillips house was hit, the city was split. The papers ran editorials. The Servant Girl Annihilator, a menace to our city. Will the police act? They printed the reward in every edition. They printed descriptions that didn't match. They printed rumors as if they were facts. Some said it was a Negro, that the attacks on white women proved it. Some said it was a white man who wanted to make it look that way. Men stood on the street corners and argued. Women stayed inside. The patrols walked the main streets with their shotguns and their lanterns. We watched them from our windows. We watched them pass the mouth of the alley. We watched them not turn down it. We knew they would never see him. He didn't walk the main streets. He walked the alleys. He walked the yards. He walked the dark. He was one of the shadows the lanterns didn't reach. Some said it was a lunatic from the asylum. Some said it was a drifter who had moved on. The only thing everyone agreed on was that nobody was safe. Not in the big house. Not in the cabin. Not in the room at the back. He got in. He always got in. If you've ever lived in a city that's afraid, where the news is the same story every week and the killer is always still at large, you know what that does. It doesn't matter how many locks you add. It doesn't matter how many patrols walk the street. Fear moves in. It sleeps in the room with you. It wakes you when the floorboard creaks. It makes you look at every stranger and think, is it you? That was Austin for 8 months. That was us. The list. I want you to hear the names. Not so you can forget them, so you can remember that they were people. They had rooms. They had doors. They had mornings they didn't get to see. Molly Smith, cook, colored. She had a husband. She had a cabin. She had a key to the flower bin that another girl came looking for at first light. December 30th, 1884. Eliza Shelley, colored. She worked for a family on East Avenue. She had a room near the kitchen. She had a window that looked out on the alley. She lived long enough to say through the window and so fast. January 1885. Irene Cross, white. She had a roommate, Mary Ramey. She had a bed in the Thomas house. She had a man look at her in the lamplight before he chose her. May 1885. Eula Phillips, white, 15, married. She had a mother in the house. She had a servant, Susan Hancock, in another room. She had a house on Water Street, the same street where Molly had died. August 1885. Mrs. Phillips, Eula's mother. She was in the house. She was in the way. He killed her too. There were others. There were attacks that might have been him and might not. There were women who were hurt and lived and never spoke of it again. There were names that didn't make the papers. There were names that got lost. I'm not a historian. I can't give you every date. I can give you what we had, what we passed at the pump, what we said when we lay in the dark. Molly, Eliza, Irene, Eula, the list, the proof that he was real, that he chose, that he got in, that the lock was never enough. The morning after, I want you to feel what it was like, not the attack, the morning after, the way the city woke up, the way the news moved. I was there the morning after the Phillips house. I didn't know it was the Phillips house yet. I only knew that something had happened. I had gone to the market early. The Hacketts needed eggs. I was at the counter when I heard two women talking. Did you hear? Water Street again, a whole family. The servant girl lived. I didn't ask, I didn't have to. By the time I left the market, the street was full of people, men in hats, women with their baskets, everyone moving toward Water Street, everyone wanting to see. I didn't go. I turned around. I went back to the Hackett house. I put the eggs in the larder. I stood in the kitchen and I thought about Susan Hancock. I thought about her crawling to the street. I thought about her screaming until someone came. I thought about the fact that she had been in the house. She had heard it. She had seen him, and she had lived. I didn't know her. I would never meet her, but I knew what she would carry. The sound, the sight, the fact that she had played dead while he was in the house, while he was in the same room. I thought about that all day. I thought about it when I put the washstand in front of the door that night. I thought about it when I tied the string. The morning after is when the city had to decide what to do. The morning after is when the patrols got bigger. The morning after is when the papers ran the story and the reward went up and everyone said this has to stop. But the morning after is also when we had to go back to work. We had to make breakfast. We had to sweep the floors. We had to lie down in the same rooms and listen to the same dark. The attack was one night. The morning after was every day. We lived in the morning after. We lived in the what if it happens again. We lived in the what if it's me. That's what I want you to understand. The horror isn't just the moment, it's the carrying, it's the way you have to get up, the way you have to go to the market, the way you have to hear the names and still tie your apron and still lock the door and still hope. The morning after is when you find out if you can still hope. Some of us could, some of us couldn't, all of us tried. So here's the first thing I need you to do. Stop assuming that it can't happen here means you're safe. Molly Smith thought she was safe. She had a husband in the bed next to her. She had a lock on the door. He got in anyway. Eliza Shelley had a family in the house. Irene Cross had a roommate. Eula Phillips had her mother in the next room. None of it mattered. He chose them. He got in. He did what he came to do. If you're listening in a house that has a back door or a window that doesn't quite close or a room that's far from everyone else, that's not a detail, that's a fact. And facts don't care that you're a good person or that you've never done anything wrong. Lock what you can, bar what you can, and then understand that the lock is only the beginning. The rest is luck. If you've ever heard a sound in the night and told yourself it was nothing, the wind, the house settling, the cat, and then lay there for an hour anyway, too afraid to close your eyes. You already know what we knew. The difference is we were right to be afraid. Someone was getting in. Someone was choosing. And the only thing between us and the list of names was a door, a string, a washstand, luck. I want to tell you about the night I thought it was my turn. It was late September 1885. The attacks had slowed, or maybe we had just stopped hearing about every rumor. The papers were full of other things, politics, the railroad, but in the servants' quarters and the back alleys we still talked, we still listened. We still went to bed with our hearts beating too fast. I had been ill, a fever. Mrs. Hackett had sent me to bed early. The house was quiet. The children were asleep. Mr. and Mrs. Hackett had gone to a dinner at the governor's mansion. I was alone in the back of the property, in my little room, with the washstand against the door and the chair under the window and the string and the pot. The room smelled of the vinegar I had used to cool my forehead. The sheet was damp. Outside, the cicadas were loud. I remember thinking before I slept that the Hacketts would be late. They were always late from those dinners, and that in the morning I would have to get up early anyway to start the fire. I remember thinking that the string was stupid, that the washstand was stupid, that I was being like all the other girls, jumpy, foolish. I remember telling myself to sleep. I woke up because the string moved. I didn't hear the pot. I didn't hear a crash. I heard the tick of the string going tight, the slight pull of the door opening just enough to test it. A small sound, the kind of sound you could miss. The kind of sound that could be the house settling or a mouse or nothing, except I had tied that string myself. I had tied it so that any pull would move it, and the door was heavy. The door didn't move on its own. Someone had touched the handle, someone had pushed, just a little, just enough to see if it would give. And then I heard nothing. No footsteps. No breath, just the dark and the sound of my own blood in my ears. I didn't scream, I don't know why. Maybe because screaming would mean he would know I was there. Maybe because I was too afraid to make a sound. I lay there, I didn't move. I stared at the door. The washstand was still in front of it. Had he pushed, had he tried, or had he only touched the handle and then stopped? I don't know how long I lay there, a minute, an hour. The room was black. The window was a square of slightly less black. I could hear the crickets outside. I could hear the distant sound of a train. I could hear nothing in the house. Then I heard the floorboard. It was the one in the hallway, the one that creaked when you stepped on it wrong. I had walked over it 1,000 times. I knew the sound. Someone was in the hallway. Someone was between my room and the main house. Someone was standing there, not moving, just standing. I still didn't scream. I reached for the only thing I had, a heavy candlestick on the table by my bed. I held it. I waited. I thought about Molly Smith. I thought about Eliza Shelley. I thought about Irene Cross and Eula Phillips. I thought if he comes in, I will hit him. I will hit him until he stops. My arm was shaking. The candlestick was cold. I had never hit anyone in my life. I didn't know if I could. I knew I would have to try. The floorboard didn't creak again. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear the door. I heard the crickets. I heard the train. I heard my heart. Once something scratched at the window, a branch or an animal, and I almost screamed then. I bit my lip. I tasted blood. I didn't make a sound. I thought if I scream, he'll know I'm here. If I scream, he'll come. So I stayed silent. I stayed still. I don't know how long. Long enough for the cicadas to stop and start again. Long enough for the sky outside the window to go from black to the faintest gray. Long enough for my legs to cramp and my hand to go numb around the candlestick. I never put it down. I never took my eyes off the door. At some point, I must have slept or passed out from fear. When I woke, it was dawn. The room was gray. The washstand was still in front of the door. The string was still tied. The pot was still in place. I got up. I didn't move the washstand at first. I stood there. I looked at the door. I looked at the handle. I looked at the string. I went to the window. I looked out. The yard was empty. The alley was empty. The sky was pale. I could hear the Hackett's cook. They had hired a new girl by then, starting the fire in the main house. I could hear the clang of a pot. I could hear life. I went to the door. I looked at the handle. There was nothing, no mark, no sign. I moved the washstand. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. The floorboard was just a floorboard. I walked to the main house. I made breakfast. I didn't say anything. I didn't tell the cook. I didn't tell Mrs. Hackett. I carried the fear with me. I carried the candlestick back to my room that night. I put it by the bed again. I never slept without it after that, not in Austin. Not for years. Maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe the string had shifted in the night. Maybe the floorboard had been the house settling. Maybe. Or maybe he had tried the door. Maybe he had found it blocked. Maybe he had stood in the hallway and listened and decided it was too much risk. Maybe he had moved on to another house, another girl, another room at the back. I had a friend, a girl named Bridget, who worked 2 streets over. She told me later that the same week I had my scare, a house on her block had had a prowler. A neighbor had seen a man in the yard. The man had run. Nobody had gotten a good look. Nobody had reported it to the police, just to each other in the market in whispers. Bridget said she had started sleeping with a kitchen knife under her pillow. She said she didn't care if it was foolish. She said we had to look out for each other. We couldn't depend on the law. We couldn't depend on the families. We could only depend on the fact that we were still here, that we had survived another night, that we would do whatever it took to survive the next one. I never knew if the man in the yard was him. I never knew if the man at my door was him. I only knew that the not knowing was part of the horror. You never got to be sure. You only got to be afraid. I never told Mrs. Hackett. I never told the police. What would I have said? I heard a sound. I thought someone was there. They would have said I was hysterical. They would have said the Annihilator didn't bother with white girls in fine houses, even though that wasn't true. Irene Cross was white. Eula Phillips was white. He didn't care. He cared about who was alone, who was reachable, who had a room at the back of the house. I don't know if it was him that night. I'll never know. But I know this, after that I never slept the same. I never left the washstand away from the door. I never untied the string. And I never, ever told myself that I was safe because I had done everything right. I had done everything right, and I had still lain in the dark, waiting for the door to open. The last attack that anyone agreed was the Annihilators was in December 1885, almost a year to the day after Molly Smith. By then, the city was exhausted. The reward had been raised and raised again. Dozens of men had been questioned. A few had been arrested. None of them fit. None of them were charged. The newspapers had moved on to other horrors. The patrols had thinned. People wanted to forget. They wanted to believe he was gone, that he had left Texas, that he had died, that he had simply stopped. He didn't stop. He just left. Or that's what some people say. Maybe he had gotten what he wanted. Maybe the patrols had made it too hard. Maybe he had always been passing through, a drifter, a sailor, a man who had come to Austin for a season and then moved on. Maybe he was dead. Maybe he was in another state. Maybe he was in another country. We didn't know. We never knew. What we had was silence. No more attacks. No more headlines. No more bodies. The reward stayed unclaimed. The case stayed open. And the girls who had survived, we stayed in our rooms. We kept the washstands in front of the doors. We kept the strings tied. We didn't stop being afraid just because the attack stopped. Fear doesn't work that way. You don't get to turn it off. You just get to live with it. You get to wake up in the dark and listen. You get to look at the door first every morning and make sure it's still closed. You get to carry it. That's what we did. We carried it. I'm going to tell you something that still keeps historians up at night. 3 years after the last attack in Austin, 1888, a series of murders began in London. Whitechapel, women in the streets, throats cut, bodies mutilated. The killer was never caught. The press gave him a name too, Jack the Ripper. Some criminologists have wondered if it was the same man. A man leaves Texas and surfaces in London. In Austin, he broke into houses and chose women in their beds. In Whitechapel, he took them in the alleys. Different method, same cruelty, same silence, no arrest, no name. The Ripper's victims were different in station but the same in vulnerability. Women alone at night with no one to hear them. We don't have proof, we have a pattern. A man who could move through the dark, get past locks and doors, kill without hesitation and vanish. Never caught in Austin, never caught in London. Maybe one man, maybe two, we'll probably never know. I don't know the answer. I only know that when I read about the Ripper, years later, in a newspaper someone had left on a bench, I felt the same cold I had felt in my room when the string moved. The same certainty that somewhere in the dark, someone was still getting in. I didn't leave right away. After the attack stopped, I told myself I would stay. I had a position. I had a reference. I had saved a little. Leaving meant starting over. It meant a new city where I didn't know the streets or the families or which houses had rooms at the back. It meant being the new girl again, the one who didn't know the rules, the one who had to learn which floorboards creaked. I stayed through 1886. I stayed through the winter. I stayed until the night I woke up from a dream. The string, the floorboard, the door, and couldn't breathe. I stayed until I realized I was never going to stop listening. I was never going to stop checking the handle in the morning. I was never going to feel like the room was mine again. It was his room now. He had taken it without ever stepping inside. So I gave my notice. I told Mrs. Hackett I had family up north. I didn't. I had a name of a woman in St. Louis who might need help. I had the price of a train ticket. I had the candlestick in my bag. I left in the spring of 1887. I didn't look back. I told myself I was leaving the Annihilator behind. I know now that I was wrong. You don't leave something like that. You carry it. You just get to choose where you carry it. I went north. I found work in a bigger city in a bigger house. I had a room that locked from the inside. I had a window that closed. I had a family that didn't mind when I put a chair under the door at night. I never told them why. I just said I slept better that way. I'm an old woman now. The Servant Girl Annihilator has been dead for decades if he was ever one man. So is Jack the Ripper. So are the girls who didn't survive. Molly, Eliza, Irene, Eula. The ones whose names we know and the ones we don't. They're all gone. Austin grew. The streets changed. The houses were torn down or built over. Nobody talks about the Annihilator anymore unless they're reading a book or listening to a story like this one. The case is still open. The reward was never claimed. The files are in a drawer somewhere. Someone could still look. Someone could still find a name. I don't expect it. I didn't expect it then. But I say it anyway. I say it for the girls who didn't get to grow old. I say it for the ones who are still in the back room somewhere listening to the door. I say it for you, so you know, so you remember, so you lock the door and then you do more than lock the door, so you don't end up on the list. But I still dream about that night. The string, the floorboard, the dark. I still wake up sometimes and think I hear the door. I still look at the window first before I look at anything else. So this is my CTA, my hook. The thing I need you to take away. You are not safe because you're careful. You're safer. You're not safe. Molly Smith was careful. So was Eliza Shelley. So was Irene Cross. So was Eula Phillips. So was I. We locked doors. We listened. We did what we could. He still came. He still got in. He still did what he wanted. The only reason I'm here to tell you this is luck. A door that held. A floorboard that creaked. A killer who chose not to push that night or who wasn't there at all. I'll never know. So do the things that make you safer. Lock the door. Bar the window. Put something in front of the door if it makes you feel better. Tie a string to a pot. Get a dog. Have someone check on you. Tell people where you are. Notice who notices you. If something feels wrong, a car that's been behind you too long, a man who's been in the same place as you have, a door that was closed and is now open, don't explain it away. Don't tell yourself you're being dramatic. Make the scene. Call the police. Run. The girls in Austin didn't have that choice. They had locks that didn't hold and windows that didn't close and a city that wanted to believe it was over. By the time they knew it wasn't, it was too late. And if you're the one who's safe, the one in the big house, the one with the family, the one who sleeps in the middle of the building with people on every side, remember the ones who aren't. The ones in the back room, the ones in the cabin, the ones who get up first and go to bed last. Check on them. Listen to them. When they say they're scared, don't tell them they're being foolish. When they put a chair under the door, don't make them take it away. The Servant Girl Annihilator didn't care if you were rich or poor, white or colored, in a mansion or a shack. He cared if you were reachable, if you were alone, if you were the one at the back of the house. That's all. And that was enough. I don't know who he was. I don't know where he went. I don't know if he died in Texas or in London or in some other city under another name. We'll never know. I only know that for 8 months in 1884 and 1885, he was real, he was fast, he was quiet, and he was never caught. The girls who survived, Mary Ramey, Susan Hancock, the others, they carried it for the rest of their lives. The ones who didn't, Molly, Eliza, Irene, Eula, the rest, they never got to tell their story. So I'm telling mine, and theirs. And the story of a city that learned too late that the dark could get in. If you take one thing from this, the lock was never the thing that kept us safe. We were never safe. We were only lucky. The girls in Austin didn't have 911 or motion lights or the words we have now for I'm not safe. They had a washstand, a string, a candlestick. You have more, use it. When your gut says something is wrong, don't wait for the morning after. Act now. That's all I have. The Servant Girl Annihilator was never caught. Jack the Ripper was never caught. We don't get to know who they were or where they went. We only get to decide what we do next. Look at your door. Look at who's in the back room tonight. And then do something about it.